The bullet whistled past Cale Nightwind's ear as he kicked down the door of the ramshackle cabin, its Colt .45 already drawn and smoking. Inside, instead of the grizzled outlaw he'd been hunting for 3 months, he found a woman's lifeless body, sprawled across the wooden floor, and a crying infant in a makeshift crib. "Well, I'll be damned," Cale muttered, lowering his weapon as he scanned the room for threats. The baby's wails echoed through the silence, and something twisted in his chest, feeling he'd buried deep after years of bounty hunting. The woman had been shot recently, her blood still warm. A note pinned to her dress read, "For the Gunslinger. Who comes looking for Vex Shadowmere, this is what's left of your debt. The child is yours now." Cale's hands trembled as he recognized the handwriting. Vex Shadowmere, the man who'd killed his brother and stolen his family's ranch, had been using this woman as bait. But the baby... The baby changed everything. He holstered his gun and approached the crib cautiously. The infant couldn't be more than 6 months old, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through him. When Cale reached down, tiny fingers wrapped around his calloused thumb with surprising strength. "Your mama's gone, little one," he whispered, his voice rougher than he intended. "And your daddy's a coward who ran rather than face me." The baby stopped crying, studying Cale's weathered face with an intensity that unnerved him. Yes. In 17 years of hunting men, he'd never felt so out of his depth. He knew how to track, how to shoot, how to survive in the wilderness, but caring for a helpless infant? A creaking floorboard behind him made Cale spin, gun drawn in a heartbeat. A woman stood in the doorway, her auburn hair catching the afternoon light. She was beautiful in a dangerous way, with emerald eyes that held secrets and a rifle pointed directly at his chest. "Drop the weapon, stranger," she commanded, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "That baby belongs to me." Cale didn't lower his gun. "Lady, I don't know who you are, but this child was left for me. I've got the note to prove it." "I'm Lyanna Starweaver," she said, stepping into the cabin, "and that's my sister's baby. Vex Shadowmere took her from me 6 months ago, and I've been tracking them ever since." The pieces began falling into place. Vex hadn't just killed the woman, he'd orchestrated this entire scenario to trap both Cale and this woman. The baby was bait, but for what purpose? "Seems we both have unfinished business with Shadowmere," Cale said, slowly holstering his weapon. "Maybe we should work together." Lyanna's rifle remained trained on him. "I don't work with bounty hunters. They're all the same cold, calculating, and willing to sacrifice anything for money." "This ain't about money anymore," Cale replied, glancing at the baby who had begun to fuss again. "This is about survival. Mine, yours, and this little one's." The infant's cries grew louder, and both adults looked at the child with growing concern. Neither of them knew the first thing about caring for a baby, but they were all each other. Had in this God-forsaken wilderness truce? Cale extended his hand. After a long moment, Lyanna lowered her rifle. "Temporary truce, but if you try anything, ... I won't," Cale assured her, surprised by his own sincerity. Something about this woman and child was awakening parts of his soul he'd thought were long dead. 3 days of traveling together had taught Cale 2 things. Babies required constant attention, and Lyanna Starweaver was nothing like the saloon girls and outlaws he usually encountered. She knew how to track, shoot, and survive in the wild, but more importantly, she had a gentleness with the baby that made something ache deep in his chest. "His name is Orion," she said, as they made camp beside a creek. The baby lay between them, on a blanket, gurgling contentedly after his feeding. "My sister named him after the constellation. She always said he was her guiding star." Cale watched Lyanna's fingers trace gentle patterns on the baby's chest. "What happened to her?" "Sister, Celeste fell in love with the wrong man." Lyanna's voice grew bitter. "She thought Vex would change, that having a baby would make him settle down. Instead, he used her as leverage against anyone who came looking for him, including you." "I'm the sheriff of Crimson Valley," she admitted, her emerald eyes meeting. "His, or I was, until I abandoned my post to find her. I'm just another outlaw, I suppose." The confession hung between them like smoke from their campfire. Cale had been hunting a sheriff without knowing it, and she'd been hunting the same man who'd destroyed his family. The irony wasn't lost on him. Vex killed my brother, Cale said quietly. Shot him in the back during a card game in Tombstone. Then he and his gang burned down our ranch, killed our cattle, and left my parents with nothing. So this is revenge for you. It was, Cale admitted, watching Orion's tiny fist wave in the air. But now ... He couldn't finish the sentence. Now he wasn't sure what this was anymore. That night, Cale took first watch while Liana slept with Orion curled against her chest. The sight of them together stirred something primitive and protective in him. He'd been alone for so long, living only for the hunt, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to want to protect something precious. When coyotes began howling in the distance, Orion started crying. Liana woke instantly, but the baby wouldn't. Be consoled. Without thinking, Cale reached for the child. "May I?" he asked softly. Liana hesitated, then passed Orion to him. The moment the baby settled against Cale's chest, the crying stopped. Tiny fingers gripped his shirt, and those piercing blue eyes looked up at him with complete trust. "He likes you," Liana observed, her voice soft with wonder. "Kids and animals always have," Cale said, gently rocking the baby. "It's grown folks who give me trouble." "Not all grown folks," Liana murmured, and when Cale looked at her, saw something in her eyes that made his heart race. The next morning brought unwelcome news. Tracks around their camp showed they'd been watched during the night. Vex's men had found them. "Need to move," Cale said, already breaking camp. "They're probably setting up an ambush ahead." "Or they're herding us toward one," Liana countered, strapping on her gun belt. "Vex is smart. He knows we're tracking him." They packed quickly, but as they prepared to leave, Orion began crying again. This time, nothing would calm him. His face was flushed, and his tiny body felt warm. "He's sick," Liana said, panic creeping into her voice. "We need to get him to a doctor." "The nearest town is Dusthaven, but that's where Vex is likely headed," Cale said, his mind racing. "It's a trap, but we don't have a choice." As they rode toward Dusthaven, Orion's condition worsened. He was listless, barely responding to their voices. Liana held him close, tears streaming down her face. "He's all I have left of her," she whispered. "I can't lose him too." Without thinking, Cale reached across the space between their horses and covered her hand with his. "We won't lose him, I promise." It was a promise he had no right to make, but looking into her desperate eyes, he knew he'd die before he let anything happen to either of them. Dr. Mordecai. Ashford had seen many things in his 40 years of frontier medicine. But the sight of a notorious bounty hunter and a former sheriff bursting into his clinic with a dying baby was a first. He worked quickly, his weathered hands gentle, as he examined little Orion. Poison, he diagnosed grimly. "Someone's been feeding this child small doses of nightshade root. Another day and he would have died." Cale's hand moved instinctively too. His gun, Vex. He's been slowly killing his own son. Liana's voice cracked with rage and disbelief. "The baby's not his," Dr. Ashford said quietly. "I delivered this child 6 months ago. The father was a traveling merchant named Joachim Brightwater. Good man, but Vex killed him when he found out about the pregnancy." The revelation hit them like a physical blow. Vex had been poisoning an innocent child just to manipulate them into a trap. The man's cruelty knew no bounds. "Can you save him?" Cale asked, his voice tight with emotion he couldn't hide. "I can counteract the poison, but he needs constant care for the next few days. You'll have to stay in town." "That's what Vex wants," Liana said. "He's probably got men watching every street." "Then we make a stand," Cale replied. "I'm tired of running anyway." They took rooms at the Dusthaven Inn, registering under false names. Cale kept watch while Liana tended to Orion, who was slowly responding to Dr. Ashford's treatment. The babies. Color was returning, and he'd managed to keep down some milk. "You're good with him," Cale observed, watching Liana coax Orion to drink from a bottle. "I always wanted children," she admitted, "but being a sheriff didn't leave much time for courting. And most men were intimidated by a woman who could outshoot them." "Their loss," Cale said sincerely. She looked up at him, something unspoken passing between them. "What about you? Ever think about settling down? Thought about it once? Kale's voice grew distant. It was a girl back in Montana. Sweet little thing named, well, it doesn't matter now. She married the banker's son while I was off chasing bounties. Do you regret it? Kale considered the question as he watched Orion's tiny hand wrap around Liana's finger. Used to, but sitting here now, watching you with him. I think maybe everything happened the way it was supposed to. That evening, as they shared a quiet dinner in their room, Orion sleeping peacefully in his makeshift crib, Kale made a decision that surprised him. After we deal with Vex, he said carefully, what happens to Orion? I'll raise him, Liana said without hesitation. He's family, and he needs someone who'll love him. Needs a father too, Kale said quietly. Someone to teach him to ride and shoot and stand up for himself. Liana's emerald eyes searched his face. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Before Kale could answer, gunshots erupted in the street below. He moved to the window and saw Vex Shadowmere standing in the middle of the dusty road, flanked by 6 of his men. The outlaw was tall and lean, with cold gray eyes and a scar running from his left temple to his jaw. Nightwind, Gex called out. I know you're in there. Come down and face me like a man, or I'll burn this whole town to ash. Kale checked his weapons, his face grim. Stay here with Orion. Like hell, Liana said, strapping on her gun belt. This is my fight too. If something happens to us, who takes care of the baby? Nothing's going to happen to us, she said firmly. We're going to end this together. Kale looked at her beautiful, fierce and completely unafraid, and felt his heart swell with an emotion he'd never experienced before. Liana, tell me after, she interrupted, rising on her toes to kiss him quickly. We have a life to build, but first we have to survive. Long enough to build it. As they prepared to face their enemy, Orion stirred in his crib, his blue eyes opening to look at them. For a moment, it seemed like the baby was trying to give them his blessing. The main street of Dusthaven had emptied except for Vex Shadowmere. And his 6 gunmen? Kale and Liana emerged from the inn, walking side by side, their hands hovering near their weapons. The setting sun cast long shadows across the dusty ground, and the air crackled with tension. Well, well, Vex drawled, his gray eyes glittering with malice. The famous Kale Nightwind, reduced to playing nursemaid. And the lovely Sheriff Starweaver, should I say, former sheriff? You killed my brother, Kale said, his voice deadly calm. You destroyed my family's ranch. And now you've tried to murder an innocent child? Innocent? Vex laughed, a sound like breaking glass. That brat represents everything I hate about weakness. His mother thought love could change me. She was wrong. You're a coward, Liana spat. You hide behind others, use children as weapons, and run when faced with a fair fight. Fair fight. Vex's hand moved to his gun. This was never about fair, darling. This was about teaching you both that some debts can only be paid in blood. A standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Kale could feel Liana's presence beside him, solid and reassuring. They'd positioned themselves to give each other covering fire, but against 7 men, their odds were slim. Last chance, Nightwind, Vex called out. Walk away, and I'll let you live. Stay, and you'll die in this dusty street, like the dog you are. I've got a better offer, Kale replied. Just you and me. Winner takes all. Vex considered this, then shook his head. I don't think so. I've spent too much time setting this up, too. His words were cut off by the crack of a rifle from a rooftop. One of his men dropped, clutching his shoulder. More shots rang out from buildings around the square. The townspeople of Dusthaven had decided to take a stand. Now, Kale shouted, drawing his Colt and diving for cover behind a water trough. The street erupted in gunfire. Liana rolled behind a hitching post, her rifle spitting flame as she picked off targets with precision. Kale's revolvers thundered, each shot finding its mark. The outlaws, caught in crossfire between the 2 gunfighters and the townspeople, began to fall. But Vex Shadowmere was a survivor. He fought his way through the chaos, using his own men as shields until he reached the... And Kale saw him disappear inside and felt his blood turn to ice. Orion. Liana screamed, having the same realization. They fought their way through the remaining outlaws, leaving them for the townspeople to finish. Racing up the stairs of the inn, they found Vex in their room, holding the baby against his chest. With one arm, while pointing a gun at Orion's head with the other. "Drop your weapons," Vex snarled, "or the brat dies." Cale and Liana slowly placed their guns on the floor. Orion was crying, his tiny face red with distress. The sight of the child in danger made Cale's vision blur with rage. "You won't kill him," Liana said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "He's your only leverage." "You're wrong," Vex replied. "My leverage is watching you to suffer. The baby dies, then you watch each other die. And finally, I'll put you both out of your misery." He cocked the hammer of his gun, and Cale saw his life, his future with Liana and Orion slipping away. But the baby, perhaps sensing the danger, suddenly bit down hard on Vex's hand. The outlaw cursed and loosened his grip just enough for Orion to slip free. The baby fell toward the floor, but Liana lunged forward, catching him at the cost of leaving herself exposed. Vex's gun swung toward her, but Cale was already moving. He tackled the outlaw around the waist, and they crashed through the window. In a shower of glass and wood, they hit the street hard, rolling apart in a cloud of dust. Both men scrambled for their weapons. Vex was faster, but as he raised his gun, a shot rang out from the window above. The outlaw stumbled, looking down. At the spreading red stain on his chest, Liana stood framed in the broken window, holding a smoking derringer. "That's for Celeste," she said coldly. Vex Shadowmere fell forward into the dust of Dusthaven's main street and moved no more. 6 months later, the little cabin outside Dusthaven had become a home. Cale had built a proper nursery for Orion, complete. With a rocking chair where Liana sang lullabies in the evenings, the baby had grown strong and healthy, his blue eyes now bright with intelligence and mischief. "He's going to be a handful," Liana said, watching as 10 men hold. Orion pulled himself up to standing in his crib. Just like his adoptive father. Cale looked up from where he was oiling his rifle at the kitchen table. His adoptive father was a perfect angel as a child. "Perfect angels don't become bounty hunters," Liana teased, moving to stand behind his chair. Her hands rested on his shoulders, and he leaned back into her touch. "Former bounty hunter," he corrected. "I'm a rancher." "Now, got the papers to prove it?" The small spread they'd purchased with Vex's bounty money was modest, but growing. Cale had proven surprisingly adept at raising cattle and horses. While Liana had taken over as Dusthaven sheriff when the previous lawmen retired, they made a formidable team in every aspect of their lives. "Mrs. Ashford stopped by while you were in town," Liana said, her voice carefully neutral. "Wanted to know if we'd made any decisions about ... certain matters." Cale set down his rifle and turned to face her. "What kind of certain matters?" "The kind that involve white dresses and gold rings," she said, a blush coloring her cheeks. "The whole town's been speculating about when you're going to make an honest woman of me." "I thought I'd already made you dishonest," Cale replied with a wicked grin, pulling her onto his lap. "Remember last Tuesday, behind the Cale Nightwind?" She swatted his shoulder, but she was laughing. "There's a baby present," as if summoned. By his name, Orion began to fuss. Liana moved to pick him up, but Cale was already there, lifting the child with practiced ease. The baby settled immediately, grabbing onto Cale's shirt with both hands. "He knows his papa," Liana said softly, watching the two of them together. "He's known from the beginning." "And what about his mama?" Cale asked, bouncing Orion gently. "Has she figured out that she's stuck with us?" "I think she suspected when she caught his papa building a cradle before the baby was even weaned," Liana replied. "Or maybe it was when she found engagement rings hidden in his saddlebags." Cale nearly dropped the baby. "You went through my saddlebags?" "I was looking for ammunition," she said innocently. "Imagine my surprise when I found a little velvet box instead." Cale set Orion back in his crib and turned to face Liana fully. "Well, since you've already spoiled my surprise, ... He dropped to one knee, pulling out a simple gold band set with a small diamond. "Liana Starweaver, will you marry me and make us a real family?" "Yes," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she pulled him up for a kiss that tasted of promises and forever. From his crib, Orion clapped his hands and babbled what sounded suspiciously like approval. When? Liana asked against his lips. Tomorrow, Cale said immediately. I've waited long enough for my happy ending. Next month, she countered. I want a proper wedding with flowers and a cake in 2 weeks, he negotiated. I'm not waiting any longer than that to call you my wife. Deal, she agreed, sealing it with another kiss. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Orion sleeping peacefully in Liana's arms, Cale marveled at how completely his life had changed. A year ago, he'd been a man consumed by revenge, hollow and alone. Now he had a family, a home, and a future brighter than any sunset. What are you thinking about? Liana asked, noting his quiet contemplation. Debt, he said simply. I rode into Dusthaven to collect on a debt, and instead I found something worth more than all the bounties in the world. What's that? Love, he said, wrapping his arms around both of them, and the chance to build something beautiful instead of just hunting down ugly. The wedding of Cale Nightwind and Liana Starweaver became the social event of the decade in Dusthaven. The entire town turned out to witness the union of the reformed bounty hunter and the brave sheriff who'd tamed him. Dr. Ashford officiated, while little Orion, now walking with determined wobbles, served as a ring-bearer under the careful supervision of several townswomen. Do you, Cale, take Liana to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death do you part? I do, Cale said, his voice steady, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. I promise to love and protect both her and our son for as long as I draw breath. And do you, Liana, take Cale to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health for richer or poorer, until death do you part? I do, Liana replied, her emerald eyes shining with unshed tears. And I promise to stand by his side through whatever storms may come. When Dr. Ashford pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was witnessed by the entire town, but it felt intensely private, as if they were the only two people in the world. Orion, not to be outdone, toddled over and hugged both their legs, causing the assembled crowd to awe in unison. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and more food than the town had seen since the Harvest Festival. Cale, who'd never been much for dancing, found himself swept into a waltz with his new wife, while Orion clapped from the sidelines. No regrets? Liana asked, as they swayed together under the stars. Only that it took me so long to find you, Cale replied, pulling her closer. I wasted too many years thinking revenge was the only thing worth living for. You weren't ready before, she said wisely. We both had to become who we needed to be first. 2 years passed in a blur of happiness. The ranch prospered under Cale's management. Liana's reputation as a fair but firm sheriff brought peace to the region. Orion grew into a precocious toddler who could ride a pony before he could properly tie his shoes, much to his parents' alternating pride and terror. Papa, look, Orion called out one morning, pointing to a hawk circling overhead. Bird. Is right, son, Cale said, lifting the boy onto his shoulders. That's a red-tailed hawk. They're excellent hunters. Like Papa? Orion asked, and Cale felt his heart squeeze. No, not like Papa, he said gently. Papa doesn't hunt anymore. Papa builds things now. Better things. The conversation was interrupted by Liana's appearance on the porch, one hand pressed to her lower back, the other resting on her noticeably rounded belly. 6 months pregnant with their second child, she moved with careful grace. Is ready? She called out, then smiled as Orion scrambled down from Cale's shoulders and ran toward her. Careful, little one, you don't want to knock Mama over, baby, Orion asked, patting her stomach with gentle curiosity. Yes, sweetheart, your baby sister will be here soon. Sister? Cale raised an eyebrow. Dr. Ashford said it was too early. To tell, a mother knows, Liana said with mysterious confidence. It's definitely a girl. I can feel it. She was right, of course. 3 months later, Aurora Nightwind entered the world with a healthy cry and a head full of dark hair. Orion, now 3 years old, was instantly smitten with his baby sister. She's so small, he whispered, carefully touching her tiny hand. Protect her, Papa. We all will, Cale said, his voice thick with emotion. That's what families do. They sat together in the nursery, Cale in the rocking chair with Aurora. Liana on the small sofa with Orion curled against her side. Marveled again at the unexpected turns his life had taken. He'd been a man driven by death and vengeance. But love had transformed him into something he'd never imagined he could be. A father, husband, a builder of dreams rather than a hunter of nightmares. What are you thinking about now, Liana asked, recognizing his contemplative expression. Legacy, he said softly. What we leave behind for them. He nodded toward the children. I want them to know that, no matter how dark things get, there's always a chance for redemption, for new beginnings. They'll know, Liana assured him, because they'll see it in how we love them and each other. Outside, the wind whispered through the cottonwoods, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out to its mate. But inside the little cabin that had become a home, all was warmth and peace and the infinite possibility of tomorrow. 20 years had passed since that fateful day, when Cale Nightwind rode into Dusthaven, seeking revenge and found love instead. The one small ranch had grown into a thriving operation, and the modest cabin had been expanded into a proper homestead. Orion, now 23, was a skilled horseman and marksman who'd inherited his adoptive father's steady nerves and his mother's strong moral compass. You sure about this? Cale asked, watching his son adjust the star pinned to his vest. The sheriff's badge caught the morning light, gleaming like a promise. I'm sure, Papa, Orion replied, using the name he'd called Cale since he was old enough to speak. Dusthaven needs a new sheriff, and I want to serve the community that raised me. Liana, now silver-haired but still beautiful, stepped forward to straighten his collar. Your sister would be proud, she said softly. She always said you were born to protect people. Aurora had died 3 years earlier in a riding accident, and the loss had shaken the entire family. But they'd held together, supporting each other through the grief, and slowly began to heal. Aurora's memory lived on in the scholarship fund they'd established for young women seeking education. And in the way Orion approached life with the same fearless compassion she'd shown. I'll do my best to honor her memory, Orion said, his voice steady, despite the emotion in his eyes. And everything you both taught me. That afternoon, as Dusthaven celebrated its new sheriff with a town picnic, Cale and Liana sat on their porch, watching their son accept congratulations and well wishes from the community. The years had been kind to them, filled with love, laughter, and the deep satisfaction of work well done. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd never come to Dusthaven? Liana asked, her hand finding his across the space between their rocking chairs. Sometimes, Cale admitted, but I try not to dwell on it. I learned a long time ago that the past is just a story we tell ourselves. The future is what matters. And what does our future hold, Cale Nightwind? He squeezed her hand, feeling the familiar warmth of her touch. More grandchildren to spoil, I hope. More sunsets to watch from this porch. More reasons to be grateful for the day. I rode into town looking for trouble and found everything I never knew I needed. That's a good future, Liana said, leaning over to kiss his cheek. I approve. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson, a young woman approached the porch. She was perhaps 22, with dark hair and eyes that held both determination and vulnerability. Excuse me, she said hesitantly. Are you Cale Nightwind? I am, Cale replied, studying her with the instincts of a man who'd spent years reading. People, what can I do for you? My name is Sage Moonwhisper, she said, her voice gaining strength. I'm looking for my father. I was told you might be able to help me find him. Cale and Liana exchanged glances. Over the years, many people had sought their help with various problems, and they'd never turned anyone away. This young woman had the look of someone who'd been searching for a long time. Tell us about your father, Liana said kindly. What's his name? Joachim Brightwater, Sage replied, and Cale felt his heart skip. He was a merchant who disappeared about 23 years ago. I've been trying to piece together what happened to him. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Joachim Brightwater, Orion's biological father, the man Vex Shadowmere had killed. Another child searching for answers about her past? Sage Kale said gently, I think you'd better sit down. There are some things you need to know about your father, and about a brother you never knew you had. As the young woman settled into a chair, Kale began to tell her the story about Joachim's death, about Vex Shadowmere, about the baby who'd been saved and raised with love. He watched her face as the pieces fell into place, saw the moment she realized who Orion was. He's my brother, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. My father had a son. He had 2 children, Liana said firmly. You and Orion. And if you're willing, you have a family here that would welcome you with open arms. Sage looked toward the town celebration, where Orion was laughing with some of the other young people. Does he know about our father? He told him the truth when he was old enough to understand, Kale said. But we never knew about you. Your father was a good man, Sage. He would have loved you both. And you? Sage asked, her voice small. Would you? Could you accept me as part of your family? Kale stood and walked to where she sat, then knelt beside her chair. Child, I learned something 23 years ago that changed my whole life. Family isn't just about blood. It's about love, loyalty, and the choice to stand by each other no matter what. If you want to be part of this family, then you already are. When Orion returned from the celebration and learned about his sister, the reunion was everything Kale and Liana could have hoped for. Brother and sister embraced as if they'd been searching for each other their whole lives. And in a way, they had been. That evening, as 4 generations of chosen families sat on the porch sharing stories and dreams, Kale reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. He'd ridden into Dusthaven as a man driven by debt and vengeance, but he'd found something far more valuable, the understanding. That love was the only currency that truly mattered. The stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, a nighthawk called to its mate. But on the porch of the Nightwind Ranch, all was warmth and peace and the infinite possibility of tomorrow. Stretching out like a promise under the vast Montana sky, the lone gunslinger had finally found his way home.